Hi everyone, good morning. This is Pulkit Agrawal here, co-founder and CEO at Connect. And today on Connect's Sales Excellence podcast, I have a very special guest, Mary McGuire, joining us from Saratoga, California. She has rich experience in incentive scheme design, implementation, and management. She has in fact spent more than 15 years in various organizations like Yahoo, VeriSign, Cadence Design Systems, and other places. Hi, Mary.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. How about you?
Great, Mary. Thanks so much for taking out time and agreeing to do the podcast today. We are really excited to hear and learn from you how one should go about designing incentive schemes, some of the challenges that you faced while implementing them, while communicating them, and other things, right? So, really look forward to having this conversation with you. And for our listeners, I think it will be a great experience hearing from you your experience around the incentive and sales comp design.
I'm excited as well, thank you.
Great. So, Mary, so you have spent years in this space, right? How does one ensure that sales comp plans are well designed? What are some of the things to take care of?
So, at the very highest level, an effective sales compensation plan has to align pretty much exactly with corporate objectives. If they be revenue, bookings, expense, whatever the metric is, it needs to align to it. If it's a particular product focus, the plan should focus on that product by paying different rates on it or whatever. So that's at a very, very high level. When you start drilling down into how do you do a plan that will incent the sales force, there's some, I think, really key principles that you have to keep in mind, and failure to do so comes with its own peril. So I think this is the case with a lot of things, but probably the single most important piece of it is to do a good communication plan when you're rolling out a new incentive plan. You need to have a document that people can retain that's specific to each role, and they should be able to take that document and with a $10 calculator kind of figure out how much they think they might make that year.
Right.
And a couple things that bear repeating is that this document should be custom to each role and responsibility. So, for example, an account manager shouldn't be able to access and look at the comp plan of an account exec or a business development person, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of a first thing. So these communication sessions need to be done pretty formally. You need to have a sales manager there, typically an HR generalist, and it's also very good to have a sales ops person there that can answer any questions that the manager may not be able to answer. And it needs to be very, very specific, and rolled out in a very punctual manner, just given some of the statutory requirements for plan rollout. And then when you come down to actual design principles, I think, what are kind of my big three that I always refer to, and it is simple, objective, and measurable. And I'll go into each of these a little bit more. What I've seen over the years is that the plans that are most effective at driving the behavior that you want are ones that are really easy for the sales rep to understand. So, and when I say easy to understand, my usual metaphor is if the sales rep is at the customer site in the heat of a negotiation and is kind of going, well, what if this deal is 3 years? What if it's 5 years? What if it's this amount? What if it's this discount? They need to be able to calculate what those different iterations would mean for their compensation on, a $10 calculator from Office Depot. And if they can't do that, then it really ceases to be an incentive, because how can you incent behavior if you don't understand what the impact of it is? So that's the first one of my big three. The second one is objective, and this is absolutely critical as well. In order to be effective, a comp plan has to be objectively measured. Like, for example, if you wanted to say, we want to measure, let's say, revenue growth from run rate at XYZ company, well, you better have a very good way to, kind of be able to pull out what that number is and have it be a number that's recognized by, the ops or the finance person that supports the team. And what I've seen in the past is that I've seen plans that are, really vague. And what happens in these sort of instances is that everybody's like, oh yeah, yes, this is definitely what we want to measure people on. And everyone nods their head and says, yes, we can measure this. And then when you start doing check-ins to, check in on being able to get the end of the quarter number from your finance or ops person, you find out that it's not objectively measurable and you have a huge issue. And so what happens then is, because of the statutory requirements and the legal requirements for notification, you essentially need to pay people out as if they're on an MBO plan, or I don't know what any other solution would be. And you've, in essence, created an entitlement plan. And that is obviously not a great practice. And then the third one is measurable. And, that sounds very much the same as objective, but it actually is not. So, for example, I've spent a lot of my career in software companies. And in software companies, a lot of the times, what will happen is there will be a decision made by product management to set up a certain bundle of products. And, it's sort of like anything else. If you purchase the bundle, it's at a discounted price. But it seems to be, at least what I've seen, that the price components of said bundles, so they say let's use Microsoft Office as an example. And Microsoft Office probably has this figured out, but other companies do not, I can tell you. And you buy an Office subscription. Well, if, let's say, you're compensating somebody on Excel, how do you pull out, unless you have it well established within corporate guidelines, how much revenue on an Office subscription is Excel versus Word versus PowerPoint? So that's why I make the distinction between objective and measurable. And, it really becomes a question of, if the rep does not easily understand how they are and will be paid, the plan ceases to become effective. And that is obviously something to be avoided. And it can be avoided simply by following these fundamental design principles and following them with great rigor.
Right. So, Mary, I think it sounds very simple, right? That you have your incentives plans, which are simple, objective, and measurable, but it's something that's not known, but many organizations fail to follow it actually in practice. And
Yes.
right, that's
Yeah.
when companies need to start thinking about changing the plans. I know if they follow these principles, which you so well laid out, you won't need to change them. But what warrants changing your incentive plans, and how often should companies start thinking about changing their sales comp plans?
So first of all, the simple, objective, and measurable is one piece of it, and that's a huge piece. I think what I've seen more often rather than, well, I've seen the objective and measurable fail, but I've typically seen the plans drive the desired behavior even if they violate one of the principles if they meet the other two. So it may not be simple, but if the rep spends 10 hours a week on it, they can figure it out. So it's not impossible to violate these and have the plan work, but let's just assume that that's not the case. One of the other things that is really important to consider when you're designing a plan, and I should have mentioned this previously, is figuring out unintended consequences. And in my experience, that is the single biggest potential risk that will require a plan change. Do you understand what I mean by unintended consequences?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that we've seen, right? People
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, I have.
who try and find
um,
ways of achieving their quotas, which are not really within the realm of, what do you say, ethical or right behavior, right? And that sort of screws up the entire
yes.
compensation.
And not just the right, not the right behavior, but highly undesirable behavior.
Correct.
So anyway, but back to your question about if you need to do a plan change. A plan change is, under the very best of circumstances, a challenge. There's a really, really tight timeline for getting it all buttoned up and rolled out. And, again, as with the first of the year, the communication plan has to be crisp, clear, succinct, and on it. Because one of the biggest issues that can arise with sales plans is statutorily, at least in the US, you can't do retroactive compensation plan changes. So let's say your quarter ended June 30th. Okay. And you've known all of June that you're going to change the plan on 7/1. If you roll the plan out on 6/28 and the sales rep determines that they might make more money or they will make more money by holding out to a particular deal to the following quarter, that's exactly what they're going to do. So, the timeline for rollout has to be just dead on. So I wouldn't communicate before the end of the quarter, but I would communicate the first business day when everyone's conscious again, just because of, the statutory requirements. And also, I mean, putting legal exposure aside, which is not something I'm accustomed to doing, but putting that aside for the moment, if you don't get it rolled out quickly, you're going to have an issue. So let's use the 6/30 7/1 example. If by the time you get all your comms documents and such rolled out, and you do your train the trainer and have all your sales manager meetings with their particular reps and the VP meetings, et cetera, if it's July 27th by then, you've already lost a month of third quarter. And, you potentially have a big revenue issue for Q3. So that's why a crisp and tight timeline when there are mid-year changes is absolutely the single most important thing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's really a good point, that even if you're changing the plans, most important thing is when you communicate it, right? And it has to be right on time. It can't be before or afterwards. Both.
Exactly.
Right, Mary. So no, that makes a sense actually. One of the things, right, that organizations try and do for various reasons is make a lot of incentive plans, right? And generally, it's when you said that it has to be simple, as you increase the number of unique plans, it doesn't remain so. And you also mentioned in your bio that you've actually decreased in a place from 60 unique plans to 22, right? That's a huge amount of number of plans. And then obviously you brought it down to 22, which is less than half. Can you just brief us on what led you to do that? And what are some of the challenges you faced while bringing it down? Or was it like everybody bought in with the idea that, yeah, it should be simplified?
So it was kind of one of those things where the business was very segmented. So you had three distinct separate teams that all were operating pretty autonomously. So when you put those all together, it was over 60 plans. And the problem with this is, and I'm sure there are exceptions to this. I mean, maybe in Microsoft, I don't know, but there could be slightly different flavors of plans. So for example, you could have an account exec and a senior account exec, but that doesn't mean that's two plans. That just means it's two flavors of vanilla. So in the particular instance that we were talking about, it was a few things that were the drivers force for it. One of it was I had just come into the organization new, and I took a look at the plans and my head about exploded because, again, I challenge you to find an organization with 60 discrete roles in it. So what I found was amongst the support team and within upper level sales management, there was support for doing this. And so I was able to get, support from HR, legal, sales ops, HR line, HR comp, simply by establishing, that I had spent a number of years in this space, and I did in fact have some credibility. So once I had them on board, it was pretty simple, because the other thing that was happening at the exact same time was that these three discrete and autonomous divisions were consolidating into one. And so rather than a sales rep selling one product, a sales rep would now be selling from the suite of three divisions products. So it fell very crisply into line with corporate objectives as well. That doesn't mean that the sales force was particularly happy about it, but it was fortunately successful because it became part of a larger movement, the consolidation of the divisions, and therefore had the backing, of everybody up to the CEO. So.
Right. So, Mary, it sounds that, sales incentive plan should be simple. Everybody should understand it. The rep should be able to easily measure, calculate their own earnings. I'm just wondering, right? Why do you need an SPM system? Why do you need an incentive solution if it's so simple? And people often fail to understand this, right? what are your views? How have you experienced? And do you feel that there is a need of an incentive or a sales compensation solution? And what are some of the things that you like to see in an SPM solution?
Okay. I think there's absolutely a huge market for good SPM systems. I've worked with some of the existing ones out there, and some of the things that I've experienced is the setup of the system at the beginning of the year is so cumbersome that it requires a large capital expenditure in order to get it up and going for the year and in sync with the plans that you've rolled out. And then along with that, because you are spending this exorbitant amount to, have to have somebody come in and literally set up your credit rules, you're dealing with someone who's external, and that you're now dealing with at least 2, probably 3 teams at a minimum. And that creates a delay, which creates then a delay in paying out against the plan, which is a problem. So that's some of the things that I've seen in the past. I've also seen issues with trying to do upper level sales reporting. I think typically they do a pretty good job of reporting, if Mary rolls up to Pulkeet, then, this is what Pulkeet's credits are. But when you go up that second, third, fourth, or even fifth level of roll up, you're talking about an Excel spreadsheet, and that's a problem. Right. So I think there's a huge market for a well-designed incentive system that is simple to administer, simple to manage, effectively communicates to the sales rep what the results are. One of the other things that I've seen is systems that are ostensibly SPM systems, and the calculations had to be done offline and then loaded into the system. So from the rep's perspective in their reporting, it looked pretty good, but all the calculations were done in Excel and then loaded. So that's another issue that I've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, then what's the use of the SPM system? It's not making the sales ops team's job easy, right? So,
yes.
Mary, you've seen, of course, you've designed the plans for sales teams. You have seen how to motivate them. You would have seen sales reps becoming sales leaders, right? So what advice would you give to all the sales reps out there who aspire to become sales leaders and VPs of business development and all, right? What advice would you have for them?
Okay. So this is kind of a tough question to answer, because I've seen people, that rise through the ranks, and then I've seen other people that are external hires. So it's kind of hard to know when you're talking about an external hire, a whole lot about their background. However, what I have seen is the people who become true sales leaders in the organizations are ones that take the time, effort, and go through the pain to thoroughly acquaint themselves with what the company's financial and strat plan is. And they understand how their quota and their role fits into the larger company objectives. I think that perspective is absolutely invaluable for a sales rep. And I think that when they have that visibility and that view, it assists them in becoming true sales leaders as opposed to super salespeople. And there is a big difference. And then I guess the second thing that I would say is the people that I have seen rise through the ranks and do well. If I had to call out a trait that I think has been common to almost all of them, it would be, these are people that are they work very effectively cross-functionally. So they know their ops person, they've spent time in their office. They know their sales finance person. They know their HR generalist. They spend time with their sales manager. And I think those people who have that level of knowledge and engagement, it creates visibility and credibility, frankly, within the entire organization and serves them very well.
Right. So those were some of the real practical tips I have ever heard, Mary. So thank you so much for this advice. Just for the audience who's listening to the podcast, if they want to reach out to you for any specific area of advice they may need on sales incentive design or various things, right? One thing I would suggest them is to just go over your LinkedIn bio, and they'll get almost half of the things, right? A lot of wisdom just from that. But let's say if they want to reach out, how can they reach out to you?
They can reach out to me through LinkedIn. I believe my email address is on there, but I will check that before this is released.
Right. No, we'll make sure that we also post it along with the podcast. So
I appreciate that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Mary, for your time. It was really pleasure having you on the podcast today. Thank you once again, and have a good day.
Oh, thank you. I enjoyed chatting with you.